Good evening, everyone. This week's Parsha is Parshas Terumah, and we are going to be starting with Perek Chaf chapter 25, Pasuk Chav Gimel, verse 23. Now, Parshas Terumah is where Hashem tells Moshe about building the Mishkan and giving him the details of what he needs to build, what needs to be made. And the Parsha goes through the different vessels, articles that were in the, let's call it the structure of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle, and the description of the structure itself too. So right now we're going to focus on, I just said, Perek Chaf chapter 25, Pasuk Chav Gimel, verse 23, and we're going to touch a little bit on the Shulchan. One of the articles, one of the vessels that were in the Mishkan, the tabernacle, was the table. And the Torah describes the table, and we know that the main function of the table was that there were special breads called the Lechem Hapanim. Those special breads were on that table. They stayed on that table the entire week. On Shabbos, the old ones were taken off, the new ones were put on. On that Shabbos that the old ones went off, the Kohanim, the priests working in the Beis HaMikdash for that Shabbos, they were the ones who ate it. And there is a well-known miracle that took place with those breads, that they stayed fresh from week to week. It was as fresh at the Shabbos they took it off, then as it was as fresh as the Shabbos it was first put on. Okay, so now, let's just read the pasuk, because there's going to be two words there that we're going to get to focusing on. So again, Perek Chaf Pasuk Chav Gimel, chapter 25, verse 23. V'asisa shulchan atzei shitim, you shall make a table of atzei shitim wood. They translate in English shitim as acacia. Okay, so that's what it's made of. A masayim arkoi, the length is 2 cubits. A cubit will be generous, it's about 2 feet. That's the generous measurement of it, I believe. Va'amarachbai, it's a cubit width. V'amavachetzi kaimasai, and a cubit and a half high. Okay. Now, the commentary of Rabbeinu Bachya, the first comment from him is going to be about the concept of the Shulchan itself. What's the purpose of the Shulchan? What's it there for? And it's very interesting how he phrases his question. He says, we can understand how the Aron, the Ark, what kind of, purpose it served, what kind of very important purpose it served. It was that where the Luchas HaEdus, the tablets that Moshe brought down from Sinai, were stored, and it had a cover to it. And as we know, as the Parsha describes, there were angelic figures that were set on top of that cover, which he says tells us about angels. It's there, he says, to show us about there is such a thing called angels. All right, so we get the purpose of the ark. But he says, Aval HaShulchan, but the table, Ma'haya Mishamish, what was it there for? What was the need for it? What was the need for this table? That's what he asks. He doesn't ask, well, if you want to have the show, if you have the lechem upon him, you got to have a table. That's not what he answers. Apparently, he sees the table with all its detail as something more than just what to put the bread on. So he says like this, and it's a very interesting concept. He explains, the purpose of the table, well, actually, is what I just said. His answer is, the purpose of the table in the house of God was the bread that was on it. Okay, fine. So you want to have a table, you want to have bread, you have the table there. And what's the purpose of the bread? And that he explains, that it should be the shoresh, he calls it the root, or as we'll see, we could really call it the conduit, that blessing should come upon it. And the bread that was on it. As I mentioned before, this bread that was on the Shulchan was eaten by the Kohanim. And we are told that no matter what morsel of that bread that a Kohen ate, he got very full from it. It was a small amount. He became very satiated from it, very satisfied from it. Which means, that there was a special blessing that rested in this bread. That this bread, any little bit of it, could fill you up. That means there was blessing that rested in this bread. Says the Rabbeinu Bachya that with the blessing that rests in that bread, the blessing then goes to everywhere. Okay, he goes like this. Hashem sends his blessing on the bread that's in it. And from there the blessing spreads in all food. And satisfaction now comes to the world. By the blessing that first rests on the bread that's on the table, now from that blessing spreads to all food. The nourishment and the satisfaction that comes from all food came about through the bread that was on the table. Because the way, or the best way, let's call it, for Hashem's blessing to take hold in the world is for it first to start in one place and then spread it everywhere else. That's how things work. Or that's the best way things should work. And therefore, says the Rabbeinu Bachya, you know what the purpose of the table was? The bread. What was the purpose of the bread? The bread was there to be blessed, to receive Hashem's blessing, that it should be a nourishing and satisfying bread, which we see that by the Kohanim. And once that blessing rested in the bread, now the blessing of satisfaction and nourishment goes to all food. That, he says, is the purpose of the table. It's a fascinating idea.
When this blessing comes?
Every week.
When he comes...
the bread was put on the table.
When Kohanim come to the...
They would experience it when they would come and eat it. But the blessing was in the bread probably right away, which is part of probably why I'm going to suggest that could have been part of why it stayed fresh the whole time. But the point is the blessing rested in the bread. It was put on the table, the blessing rested in the bread. The Kohanim themselves experienced the blessing when they ate it. But that showed the blessing in the bread, and from the blessing of the bread, and from the bread, it went to everywhere else.
But the same happened when you bless bread. It's called spread for all foods.
I don't know.
No, what we said.
We make a blessing over bread because we make a blessing over bread.
But we can, in this case, we cannot repeat any blessing for other food.
But that's not, that's interesting what you're saying. It's not the same idea. Okay. Not the same idea, but I understand what you're trying to say. Okay. Now, so what the Rabbeinu Bachya is saying is that the purpose of the Shulchan was the bread, and the bread was the conduit. It was the pipe by which Hashem's blessing comes down to the world and spreads everywhere else. That's his first comment. The next comment he makes is based on a medrash. And the medrash says like this. And for this, we have to go back to the pasuk and read the pasuk again. Look at the first four words. Perek Chafei, chapter 25, pasuk Chav Gimel, verse 23. V'asisa shulchan atzei shitim. You shall make a shulchan of shitim wood, which we said in English they translate as acacia. But take a look at the word shitim. The word shitim has four letters in it. Shin, Tes, Yud, and Mem. The Medrash says that this word shitim, besides for being the name of the wood, is also meant to be an acronym. An acronym means that each letter stands for a different word. Okay, and again, following a theme of blessing, the Medrash says that each letter of shitim represents another type of blessing. All right, so let me ask you. Let's see if we can figure it out together. Right? Take the letter Shin. Okay, what blessing, what thing that we always seek starts with the letter Shin?
Shabbat.
Close. That's good. That's good. Close. Shin stands for Shalom, peace. Okay. Tes stands for the word Tova, goodness. Tov, goodness. Yud, the letter Yud stands for Yeshua, which means salvation. And Mem stands for mechila, which means forgiveness. So, and the Medrash says that we find the Aron, the ark, was made from shittim wood. The mizbeach, the altar, was made of shittim wood. Kikol ha'tovos ha'elu, for all these blessings, all these benefits, nechlales ba, they are all included in each one of these vessels. Ubayis b'sibasam, and they come through them. So the fact that it says that these vessels were made with shittim wood, the Medrash says, means to tell us that these benefits, these blessings of shalom, peace, tova, goodness, yud, Yeshua, salvation, mem, mechila, forgiveness, all come from those articles. Okay? Now, we can try and sit down now and try to figure out, how do we find all of them by the articles? Now, if you think about the mizbeach, the altar, right? The altar upon which the karbanos, the sacrifices, were brought. Okay, so we can understand that the sacrifices bring us peace and goodness, salvation and forgiveness. Forgiveness for sure, right? The ark, which represents the Torah, we can also understand that brings us peace, goodness, salvation, mechila, forgiveness. What about the table? How does the table at least bring, tova, we just mentioned, the blessing that comes through the bread, shalom, peace, Yeshua, salvation, mechila, forgiveness, how does the table supply us, do that? And on that, says the Rebbeinu Bachya, a very interesting idea. And if I understand his and I based on his words, it comes out that the idea of, at least he focuses on the forgiveness, but again, it can relate to other things also. The idea of how the table provides some of these benefits may not be the actual table of the tabernacle, of the Mishkan, but the table of the tabernacle, which again is bread, blessing. The table of the tabernacle represents our tables, the tables of our home. And in that he explains, Gambasibas HaShulchan, also from the table, you can have these benefits. Kihu mizbeach kapara la'adam. Your table can be like an altar that atones for a person. And whatever an altar accomplishes, your table can accomplish. V'halechem shala shulchan, and the bread on your table, hu chashav kekarban al gam mizbeach. It's like a sacrifice on the altar. When? K'sha'adam tav ayin meitiv umachal shamaniyim. When a generous person feeds the poor from the bread on his table, that is when the bread is considered like a sacrifice. And he shows us a source for this. There's a source in which the Talmud explains, Bizman Beis HaMikdash Kayim, when the Beis HaMikdash was existing, Adam Miskaper Ayidei Mizbeach. A person would gain atonement through the altar. Achsham She'ein Beis HaMikdash Kayim, now without a Beis HaMikdash, Adam Miskaper Ayidei HaShulchan, a person gains atonements through his table. How does a table gain you atonement? How does a table become like an altar? When the bread from your table is used for the poor. That is when your food becomes a sacrifice. When you feed the poor from your table, that is when your table is like the altar and your food is like a sacrifice. And if that's what it's considered, then it brings atonement for you. And then it's like all the other benefits that you can gain from the altar. But how does it all happen? When you feed the poor from your table. Now, is that just another way of talking about giving tzedakah? It would sound like it's a little bit more. It seems to me like to say the food on your table is like a sacrifice on the mizbeach isn't just, well, when you give somebody a check and now he has money to buy food, and that money could have been food on your table. So now that's like the sacrifice on the table. It seems to me that, and I think that's the simple understanding of the words here, is that he is specifically talking about feeding people. That we're not just talking about, handing somebody money, which I'm not trying to put that down, and then you send them away. bringing a poor man into your house, bringing a person into your house who needs food, whether it be the poor who need food, or it be someone who needs a place to eat. All these things are where you are giving him the food from your table. And the benefit of that is that besides the fact that he's getting food at a table. That means he's being treated like a mensch. He's being treated with importance. He's being showed companionship, friendship. He's sitting at a table. He's in a house. He's a mensch. He's eating like a respectful human being. Part of the greatness, of the importance of feeding the poor from your table is the fact that you've brought them into your home and you've made them feel at home. And so it's not just the benefit that they get. Again, it's not always possible to do that, but a person who can do that, a person who actually can bring someone into their home and actually feed them from their table, that is where we're saying it's like the sacrifice on the altar, because you're actually they're actually getting the food from you, and they're getting it off your table, which means there's the usage of the table. You know what I mean? If we're talking about the table that you eat from, and we want to call that the altar, it would seem that we're talking about using the table also. That means you're actually feeding them at the table. And the benefit of that is the fact that they sit at a table and eat like a mensch. That is something that makes a person feel respected. It makes a person feel wanted, and a person gives a person importance. And therefore, it would be that specific way or at least at the highest level, this would be the highest way of your table being considered like an altar, like the Mizbeach. And then the Reina Bachya ends with a fascinating custom. And he writes, Uminik Chasidim, Shabbat Sarfas, the custom of the pious people in France. Now we're talking about, in the times of the Rishonim. We're talking about, I don't know the exact year, but we can be talking about the 1400s, the 1500s. And he says that, listen to this custom, that the pious people in France, they would make from their table their coffin. When they would pass away and there was wood needed to make the coffin, what wood was used to make the coffin? Their table. Why? In order to show, a person does not take anything with them. None of his toil will come with him, will escort him. Other than the charity, the righteousness that was done in your lifetime, and the good that you did from your table. The point is that the table is used for helping others, and the lesson of making the coffin for the person who passed away is to deliver this message. You want to know what you take with you? You take with you what you did from your table. You take with you the tzedakah, the kindness you did with others. That is what you take with you. Fascinating custom.
This is coffin made from table, or this is from wood, the same wood?
No, the table.
Really table?
Yeah, you take apart the table and you make the coffin out of it.
And make new table.
Well, the person passed away, so I don't know.
No, but there is somebody else.
Okay, fine. But the point is that it's to show this person used the table for feeding the poor, and therefore this is what's taking him to his final resting place. And it's a message for all of us, and a merit for him for that, and a merit for him, of course. So this second part of the Beina Bachya is focusing on the shitim, the type of wood that was used, and how the Medrash says what it stands for. It stands for the benefits that a person can have. One of those benefits are mechila, or atonement. Wherever the shitim wood are in the vessels of the Mishkan, they provide these benefits. And he elaborated on the table to show how is the table going to give you all those benefits. The answer is because our sages teach us that one's table can be like the altar if they feed the needy, if they feed those who need a meal, those who need a place to stay, a place to eat. If that's what you use your table for, that is when your table becomes like the altar. Okay.
But the idea of eating bread is not from here. Bread say have special value.
No, not necessarily. No. I mean, I think the specialty of bread is because it was always considered a staple of life, one of the main foods that you have.
Maybe this.
And that's why the bread's on the table.
No, but maybe from here.
I don't.
Bread kind of sacrifice.
It's not really a sacrifice.
No,
it's not offered on the altar. It's not brought on the mizbeach. It's eaten by the kohanim.
Okay.
But I think the idea is that the bread is just essentially always looked upon as.
This is exactly table for bread. It's nothing else.
True, that is true. That's true because that's what it was used for.
But the idea to eat bread or special bread, special.
You mean challah?
No challah, yeah. This is not from here.
No, I don't think so. No, I've never heard of that. Maybe. You mean a special bread?
Yeah.
I don't know. That's an interesting idea. Interesting. Okay. Next thing I want to talk about is Perek Chavav, chapter 26, Pasuk Lamed Aleph, verse 31. And we'll just start a little bit with it, and then we'll skip to another verse which we want to focus on. V'asisa Parochet. You're going to make a curtain. What was the curtain used for? So, it first tells us what the curtain is made from. It first tells us what the curtain was made from. It was made from the blue wool, tcheles, v'argvan, v'talashani, v'sheish mashzar. It was made from blue, purple, and red yarn. Apologize for that. Okay. So it tells us it's made out of these different yarns. Now let's skip to Pasuk Lamed Gimel, verse 33. What are you going to do with this curtain? The Pasuk before it says you make these pillars, and these pillars have these clasps. They have these hooks. You put the curtain, under the hooks. And then you will bring inward of the curtain Eis Arona Edus, the Ark of Testimony. The curtain shall then divide for you between the holy and the holy of holies. So let's talk about for a second the construction of the Mishkan. The structure of the Mishkan had two parts to it. It had a section called the Kodesh, the Holy, and a section called the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies. And the Holy of Holies is where the Aron HaKodesh, the Holy Ark, sat. In the other section is where you had the menorah, the candelabra, the Shulchan, the table, and the golden altar, it was called. And there were two sections. Those sections were divided by a curtain. Divided by a curtain. That's this curtain. This curtain is going to be the divider between as the pasuk says, "V'hivdila pareiches lachem ben hakodesh ben kodesh hakadoshim." The paroches, this curtain is going to divide to the holy and the holy of holies, and you're going to put the ark on on one side of the curtain where the kodesh hakadoshim is. Okay, now. So, if I were to ask you, what's the purpose of the curtain? It's to divide between the holy and the holy of holies. In the first Beis HaMikdash, it wasn't a curtain. It was actually a wall. It was a wall that also had a doorway that was covered by a curtain. But by the Beis HaMikdash, it was a little bit different. Okay. Now, there is a pasuk later on in the book of Shmos, in Parshat Pekudei, at the end of the book of Shmos, which is where the Torah is describing how Hashem told Moshe to set up everything in the Mishkan, and when he talks about the ark, so the pasuk says, V'nasatas hakaporos al aron ha'edus b'kodesh hakadoshim. You're going to put the cover on the ark. V'samta shabes aron ha'edus. You're going to put into the ark the edus. I'm sorry. Yeah, you're going to put into the ark. No, I'm reading this right. Okay. Excuse me. Let me just get the place exactly. This is after chapter 40. Okay. Chapter 40, verse Pasuk Gimel, verse 3. So there it says that Hashem tells Moshe to erect the Mishkan. The Sam Tashem is Aaron Ha'edus. You will place there the Ark of the Testimony. The Aron, the Ark, contained the testimony, refers to the Luchos Ha'edus, talking about the tablets that Moshe brought down from Sinai. And you shall cover the ark. You shall screen the ark with the Parochet, with the curtain. Okay, and then it says, then you bring the other articles and you set them up. So it's very interesting how the Torah here, when it describes the kaporos, or the Parochet, describes the curtain. What is the curtain doing? It's covering the ark. You see that?
This is not Keter.
Excuse me?
This is what, 43?
Chapter 40, verse 3. It says, you'll put there the ark of testimony, and you will screen the ark with the curtain.
Is this curtain?
Paroches.
This is the same as...
Yeah.
This is different word.
It's the same one.
Okay.
Okay? Now, so it's very interesting, and this is pointed out by Rabbi Emmanuel Bernstein, that here the Torah seems to be describing the purpose of the curtain as covering the Aron, covering the ark. In our Parsha, it describes it as separating between the Holy and the Holy of Holies, and again mentioning that the ark is going to be on the other side, so to speak, of the Paroches and the Holy of Holy sides. But it says, in our Parsha it says you'll bring the ark to the other side of the curtain, and the curtain will divide between the Holy and the Holy of Holies, which sounds like it's a division between these two areas. And in our Parsha, and later on Parshas Pekudei, the wording seems to imply that it's meant to be, so to speak, a screen in front of the ark. It's covering the ark. It's a screen in front of the ark. It's being used for the ark. That's its purpose. Its purposes for the ark. Is its purpose for separating the areas, or its purpose to cover the ark? Well, it would seem like it's both. It does both purposes. And he points out very interestingly how we actually find how the ark fulfilled each purpose, sometimes on its own. Like in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle, it's serving both purposes. But there are times where we find that actually it served each purpose by itself without the other. Where was that? So number one, when we had in the second Beis HaMikdash. In the second Beis HaMikdash, there was no ark, there was no Aron. The ark had been hidden before the first Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, and during the second Beis HaMikdash, there was no Aron, there was no ark. In the Holy of Holies was something called the Even Shasiyah, the foundation stone, the stone that the world developed off of, so to speak, or developed off of, and that was in the Holy of Holies. No ark. Still, we have the wall. Instead of the Parochet, it was a wall. But you had a wall, you had a separation. There was still a separation between the two areas. There were still two areas, and there was still a separation between them, even though there was no ark.
But there is no tablets.
Excuse me?
First temple was tables.
There was.
Tablets.
Right, there was no ark, no tablets. Both of them not.
What reason to
because it was still the holier area. It was still the holiest area. The Kohen, no one went in there other than the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur.
Even with no ark?
Even without an ark there. But I told you, it was the Evan Shasiah, the special stone that was there. And that was, but there was no ark. And the Evan Shasiah was not the ark. In some ways it was a replacement, but it wasn't like the ark. So therefore, you see that the separation, the wall or the Parochet was there to separate the areas. It was still there to separate the areas because there were still meant to be two separate areas, one holier than the other.
If you remove our Torah, you need to have curtain?
No, it's not the same. Not the same. But it's interesting. It's like, to say that we needed a curtain to block the Evan Shasiah, that's the Evan Shasiah wasn't the ark. It's not something that unique that you'd say it has to be covered. I mean, maybe that is the explanation. Once it's in place of the ark, you need a covering for that. But I don't know if that's the way to look at it. I think the way to look at it is, as he says, that it comes out that you have and again, you clearly had two separate areas. The areas were there, but there's no ark. And therefore the wall still served that purpose of separating between the two areas. Now, then there were times where the Parochet, the curtain, served as a cover for the ark without being a separation between the areas. When was that? That was when the Mishkan, right? We know that the Jewish people traveled through the desert. And every time they traveled, they had to take apart the Mishkan, carry it, and then set it up again in the new spot. And the Torah just tells us what has to be done, when it's being taken down, how it should be taken down, what do the Kohanim do when they take it down. And when each one of the vessels was meant to be now moved and carried, it was covered. When the ark is meant to be carried and covered, the Torah says, what do you cover the ark with? So here's the pasuk. This is a pasuk that's in the book of Midbar, and not here. Uba Aaron ubanav, Aaron and his sons will come, Mitzayah Machana, when the camp travels. V'hoiridu es Parochet hamasach. They shall take down the curtain that's separated. V'chisu as Aaron ha'odos, and they will cover the ark of testimony with it. So you take down the curtain, that curtain in between, and you use the curtain to cover the ark. The other vessels were also covered. They had their own special covering. Here, the ark was covered with what? With the curtain. Now, when seeing this, I would have just assumed that, okay, everything needs to be covered, and here we cover with the Parochet. And for some reason, that happens to be the cover. But according to what we're saying right now, it makes a lot of sense why it was the cover. Because it's always meant to be the cover. One of the purposes of the Parochet is to be that cover, that screen, that covering for the ark. So therefore, when the ark has to be covered, when the structure comes down and the ark needs to be covered, what do you cover it with? What it's always covered with, what it's always screened by, the curtain. And is the curtain now making a demarcation between the two areas? No, there are no two areas. The Mishkan is being taken apart. Nonetheless, that's what's being used to cover the ark, because that's the purpose of the curtain. It's meant to be a covering, a screen for the ark. So when the ark is being moved and it needs to be covered, what do you cover it with? What it's always covered with. What it's always screened by. What it's always protected by. So it makes a lot of sense. And then he points out, right, Bernstein, and he cites this from different sources, that if you examine what happened in the first Beis Hamikdash, as we said before, you could also see these dual purposes. Because, as I said before, in the first Beis Hamikdash, where there was an ark, so the separation was a wall, and at the entrance, where you could basically go into the Holy of Holies, there was a curtain. That curtain was directly in front of where the ark was. So you've got this wall, you've got the demarcation, and you've got the covering of the ark. And it's very interesting. Think about it. If you have the wall part, let's say there'd be no curtain, but you had the wall, would you have the separation between the two areas? You certainly would. So the stone wall is what shows, what represents or demarcates the purpose of the separation as separating between the two areas. The curtain that's in front of the ark, that now shows the purpose of covering the ark, screening the ark. You could basically explain the fact that the wall that in the Beis Hamikdash that was between the holy and the holy of holies in the Beis Hamikdash, they called it the Heichal. But the separation between the two areas actually in itself was, you had part material stone and part curtain to actually bring out the two purposes. You've got the area that you've got the purpose of separating the domains, and you also have the purpose of screening, of covering the ark. So a very interesting way of looking and understanding the purpose of this parochas, of this curtain. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you for listening.